Good morning, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here, and I really appreciate an opportunity to speak with you this morning about a topic that's very near and dear to my heart. And Barbara's already stolen a theme that I might have thought about when I moved into past president years. So the other good news is Dr. Newman liked my title, so I already feel like I'm a winner today. So we think a lot about different perspectives on aging, and one of the concerns that I have as a person that works in this area is the anti-aging movement. Hence the beginning of the title, thinking about is the goal not to grow older, or is the goal to grow older better? And certainly there's a lot of research going on that is really looking at the cell environment that is really making great strides in telling us that there are ways to find genes, proteins that are very much related to biomarkers for aging, or in fact can have the potential to delay the aging process. So today what I'd like to do is I'd like to take a 10,000-foot look at 4 major issues. The first is to think about promoting physical activity across the lifespan. There's a tendency for us to think in the aging research that we begin at 65. That's where aging research begins. But I think we all recognize that aging is a lifelong process, that it begins as soon as we enter the world and it ends as we leave the world. I also want to address today the role of the socio-cultural environment in promoting physical activity. That's not something that we've had a dialogue about at this conference thus far. And then I want to talk a little bit about the role of mobile technology. It's absolutely burgeoning, and there are many, many software applications out there and wearable sensors that are really purporting to really give a boost to the aging process. And then I want to talk about a topic that is also near and dear to my heart, which is the idea of the patterns of ageist discrimination that may in fact really have a significant impact on whether or not at the community, the state, and the federal level that many of the initiatives that we here in this room are most fond of will actually be implemented. So this was a big year for aging. It was the 2015 White House on Aging event. It took a very different approach this year. It was not one where you went to the White House to participate, but you could podcast it for the 13 hours it was on during the day. And the reason why I want to bring that up, also it was the 50th year of the celebration of Medicare that was first instituted, the first White House Conference on Aging. But one of the 4 themes that emerged from the White House Conference on Aging this year was the topic of healthy aging. So it has been brought to the forefront at a national level that making sure that older adults grow old as healthy as they can possibly be was a target theme. So my view is going to be from 10,000 feet. We've had some extremely articulate presentations over the course of the last 2 days that have looked very, very minutely and very in a detailed fashion at some of the personal factors that are contributing to the social ecological model. Oh, and I apologize for this, but I love this. This is something that I think about a lot. This is Wu and his wife. Wu is 104 years of age, and her husband is 102. And the quote by Frank Carter is that we've done a really good job of helping folks reach old age, but we really haven't done a particularly good job helping them enjoy that older adulthood. And so that's a topic that I want to pick up today. Despite some very positive statistics that came out of the papers that were related to the White House on Aging conference, I believe there were some sobering statistics that also emerged from that. The first one being that some of the very same advances that have contributed to the improvements in population health are now actually threatening health across the lifespan. And some of those come to the very same things: the access to food, being able to wipe out some of the acute diseases that were leading to premature mortality, are now coming back to haunt us in the sense of the fact that we now have too much access to high-calorie foods and that we're not really embracing a healthy lifestyle. So some of those lifestyle risk factors are becoming much more prevalent as it relates to the onset of chronic disease. There's an increase in adult onset obesity that may actually result in increased frailty and disability in later years. And there is some emerging evidence that the generation to follow the boomer generation is actually going to age with a higher level of disability and a much lower level of fitness. So in fact, the trends that we're trying to move in a positive direction may actually reverse and move in a negative direction. We've also found that health literacy or health-related knowledge has not necessarily translated into action. Even though older adults in particular know that eating well and being physically active is important, it hasn't necessarily translated into action. And I think some of that could come to the final theme that I want to talk about today, and that is what is emerging as an expert versus public view of aging. And there's a document I want to share with you today that I think is really quite eye-opening and continues to really potentially dictate the way in which the public perceives aging. So here's the social ecological model. We've talked about it a little bit over the course of the last couple of days, but I thought I'd show you a graphic. So we talk about intrapersonal factors contributing, we talk about interpersonal factors, and in our motor control section of this year's conference, we talked much about intrapersonal, those things that contribute to whether or not the individual makes good progress through the aging process. We also then moved into talking about some of the interpersonal factors that will also contribute to successful aging, looking at group dynamics, group-mediated cognitive behavioral counseling. And so today I'm going to move a little bit further up in that milieu and talk about social cultural environment and the impact that it may have on promoting physical activity and how society and policy may also impact future research in aging. So the first thing I'd like to think about, have us all think about, is promoting physical activity across the lifespan. Again, there's been a tendency for us to segment our work into pediatrics, teens, young adults, and older adults. And I want us to really start thinking about promoting physical activity across the lifespan. Because one of the things that we know is that how we manifest ourselves as older adults is very much a product of all of what we do from very young childhood through adulthood. So when we're thinking about that, and I've heard a lot about different physical activity interventions, and I have, in fact, in my own work, moved quite a bit away from the structured exercise programs that I used to investigate. I asked the question of, does the type of exercise or physical activity intervention really matter? And my answer to that would be absolutely. And the reason for that is some interventions are going to work better with some aspects of the population than other aspects of the population. The hard part for us, I think, is to determine which physical activity interventions are going to be most likely embraced by different sections of the population. So we think about structured exercise, and we've done a lot of structured exercise activity interventions versus what is now emerging as more lifestyle-related interventions. How do we integrate physical activity into our daily lives? I run a center at Cal State Fullerton where we have our older adult clients coming in 2 days a week to engage in a well-rounded physical activity program. Aerobic endurance, resistance training, flexibility, balance, and agility. By the end of that week, they have accumulated their 150 minutes of physical activity in their 2 75-minute periods. But what is it they do outside of that structured environment? We know from some of the more recent literature that individuals are spending as much as 8.5 hours a day in sedentary behavior. So what are our clients doing when they leave us at the end of that day? They've accumulated their 150 minutes for the week, certainly not over a 3 to 5 day period that we're looking for. And it's certainly at the very least at a moderate intensity, which is also one of our recommendations. So the Lifestyle Independence for Elders trial is a very large multi-centered trial that has looked at the role of structured exercise. And it's been demonstrated to be a very effective intervention studied over a 2-year follow-up period. Sarah was talking yesterday about active living every day and active choices, which are more lifestyle-directed physical activity interventions. Some of the work coming out of Australia right now in Lindy Clemson's lab has moved away, even in the full risk reduction work, from structured exercise programs to more lifestyle-oriented programs. Because one of the things we know from the research that we do is we can keep older adults engaged in the intervention for the period of time that the intervention is going on, but after that, we see a lot of attrition and non-compliance with the recommendations of the intervention. And one that we just finished doing a feasibility study on, the Stay Well at Home, is a lay-led multifactorial full risk reduction program that combines a structured exercise program with some of the behavioral change strategies that both Larry and Sarah were talking about yesterday. And what we're finding from that is that if we do integrate behavior change strategies into either a lifestyle-based intervention or an exercise-structured intervention, we do see significant changes in full risk reducing behaviors. We may not see as much changes in physical performance because we're working with a much more frail, high-risk, older adult population. But what we are seeing is some very significant changes in behavior, which we would speculate would lead to more long-term compliance with the recommendations that we're making. We also think about, and I don't think we've come to any conclusion about this yet, is that what is the optimal dose and intensity? Some might argue that we've set the bar too high in terms of physical activity recommendations, particularly for older adults who are more frail. Does it become an issue for them that they don't feel that they can achieve the goal, and so they don't bother to start? So how do we set the bar a little bit lower to have them embracing physical activity on a daily basis? Some very recent work actually coming out of Oregon State University by Laprinzi et al. Actually manipulated the algorithm for dose and intensity. And instead of a high dose, a moderate to vigorous dose intensity, they did a light dose intensity, but they spread it over 300 minutes as opposed to the 150 minutes. And they actually found that they had significant improvements in health-related risk factors. So it may be that we have to think a little bit more broadly about dose, intensity, and in fact the content of the intervention that we're doing. And my own special attraction has been to looking at motor skill enhancement-based interventions. So Foolproof is very much being driven by my motor control learning background and thinking about using motor skills and enhancing motor skills, but in more complex and variable environments that push the systems in a very non-repetitive way. And I think some of that work was very nicely supported by the comments that Carl and both Nick were making yesterday about how we can achieve this structural variability in the systems. So let me turn a little bit to the value of the social cultural environment. And there's a lot of very good work going on looking at how can we structure the built environment to promote physical activity. And if we do it in the right way and with the right design, and we think both about the physical characteristics and the social characteristics of the environment, can we achieve good outcomes in terms of fitness and physical activity promotion? So you can see up here in the left diagram how trying to create a walkable environment that meets the needs of a number of different individuals and still creates a safe and accessible environment, to looking at the aesthetics of an environment. We know that older adults in particular enjoy walking in what they perceive to be aesthetically pleasing environments. I don't think any of us in this room would not want to do that as well. When we look down here, we look at planned neighborhoods that create nice wide pathways that twist and turn. And here, nice wide and complete sidewalks that older adults can safely navigate with assistance. So what is the impact of age-friendly community environments? And this is actually an initiative that is occurring in at least 3 communities in the United States to look at how can we structure our communities to promote physical activity, spontaneous physical activity. So we know that creating age-friendly communities are extremely important for older adults. More often than not, they're not doing the long commutes that they were when they were working, so their environment, their immediate environment around them becomes extremely important as their primary living space. So how can we design those environments to make them livable and walkable for older adults? We also know that the social and physical characteristics are important. So is it aesthetically pleasing? Are there complete walkways? Can an individual really locomote through that environment because the surface changes? We also know that an environment that has a high level of social capital is one that is going to be very conducive to promoting physical activity. And that social capital relating to, is it safe? Is it perceived to be accessible? Are there neighbors that are trustworthy? So it makes for a walkable environment. And we know from the research that's been done, both within communities and at a multiple community level, that there is a very positive correlation between walkability, better physical health, increased cardiorespiratory fitness, and also a reduction in body mass index. We also know from a very recent study that was looking at communities that combined both healthy older adults and individuals in the early stages of Alzheimer's, that walkable environments also significantly improved cognition over studying for a 2-year period. What was interesting about that particular study was that neighborhoods that invited you to explore by adding twists and turns was very, very meaningful in terms of enhancing cognition as well as physical health. And I think a multi-community study that was recently done by Wilson and colleagues, where integrating social marketing strategies that emphasize safety and access was particularly beneficial in terms not of increasing the amount of moderate physical activity, but in terms of increasing the number of people using that environment. So over a 2-year period, they found that the number of walkers went from 40 to 200, simply by making the environment accessible to the individuals. And one would hope that over time, that the level of physical activity intensity would also increase. I want to talk very briefly about the role of mobile technology. All of us are very much aware of the burgeoning mHealth technologies that are coming out, creating greater access to primary care physicians. Some of us wear those wearables, those fitness trackers, and I know, Patty, they're not very reliable, but they can be very effective as a motivational tool, particularly those that actually shift the goal based on how much activity is actually going on. I certainly, as one person, find them to be a very motivational tool, and in giving them to my parents as a Christmas present, I had no idea the level of competition that was going to emerge just by giving them that motivational tool. We also know that there's a lot of in-home surveillance that's now occurring, and whether that brings up some very significant ethical issues of privacy and whether or not we want Big Brother John looking over our shoulders. We do know that it can be instrumental in identifying unusual activities of daily living that may precipitate a call or may precipitate access. Creating mobile technology that is older adult friendly. Not thinking, we know that older adults do embrace technology, a myth of a lot of our technology designers, that they feel that older adults cannot embrace technology. They just haven't kept up with the times. But part of the problem is that whenever we get a new iPhone or we get a new laptop, it has a plethora of applications on it, some of it that I've never ever opened in the entire time that I've had it. So you can imagine the overwhelming experience when you open up a homepage and all you've got is a sea of applications and not much else. So developing age-friendly interface devices to reduce that social isolation and increase that social connection. And this is my favorite over here. This is Robi Mini. And Robi Mini was developed by a company in Shanghai, a very forward-leading thinking company. And Robi is 40 centimeters tall and was built to go into homes to be both a monitoring and an entertaining device for older adults. Not only can Robi, through face recognition, distinguish the individual that they are monitoring, but they can also understand 95% of all the words that the individual is saying. So they can be truly interactive to the point where if Roby can detect that the older adult has a depressive expression, Roby can come up with a joke for the older adult to do. What's most valuable about these tools is one of the other themes of the White House on Aging was caregiver burden. That what we're doing is we're actually manifesting poor health not only among the individuals who are managing chronic disease, but their caregivers. We're also seeing deleterious health outcomes from the caregiver burden that exists for many younger, either spouses or family members. We're also moving to a technology, and I'm not a big fan of robots. I saw something come over one of my internet connections where it was a picture of a little robot on a table in a nursing home in the Netherlands that was leading an exercise class. And I thought, well, that's not really good for our profession at all if this takes off. So, you know, robotic technology is out. Verizon has brought out RFPs looking at how can you integrate the robots that they've created. What's nice about this too is it can create a social connection because you can use Roby as a screen to connect with your loved ones who may be at a much greater distance from the home. So I think there is a lot of value in mobile technology and how it might really promote the health of older adults. Oh, the other thing about Roby too is that he's locked into trackers that the client is wearing and can actually indicate to the client that it really is time to do a little bit of exercise because they've been sitting for too long. So I think you've got the on-the-spot boss there. So what are the potential benefits? We know from some of our more objective physical activity data, many of you in this room do that we can provide much more objective and detailed information about what exactly the level of physical activity is that the individual is doing. And on the basis of that, we might argue that we can design more tailored interventions as a function of that, rather than relying on the bias that emerges from self-reports. We can also use them as motivational tools. I think for some, they're motivational. Sometimes that's over an acute phase, and many of them end up somewhere in a drawer, either because the battery's gone dead and nobody knows how to fix it, or it just isn't serving the purpose that you initiated it for. In-home monitoring of daily activity and health is becoming extremely huge in the fall risk reduction world, trying to monitor and surveil in the home individuals who are at high risk and really detect unusual behaviors, preferably before the person's on the floor. Even though we know some of the body-worn sensors that we're developing are very good at detecting after the person's fall, some of the wearable sensors that we're now involved with developing, and I am working with a group doing that, is trying to ascertain when the person is at risk for a fall and signaling through vibratory sensation that they need to make an adjustment in their posture. We also know that it can facilitate communication with health professionals, and in many cases it can reduce social isolation. We know that older adults will embrace mobile technology if they perceive it to be meaningful to them, meaningful and valuable. And many older adults have embraced Skype and other forms of connecting with families who are at a greater distance from them. Roby, ideas like Roby, and Roby retails for $723 US. I was quite amazed at that. I thought, oh, this is going to be out of the world expensive. How could we possibly justify putting this in homes? But we're finding that well-designed mobile technology that can actually learn is really not that expensive these days. And it can also be used as clinical and in-home rehabilitation tools. So again, a lot of the work that's going on looking at wearable sensors, smart jackets, can also be used as both a rehabilitation tool as well as a surveillance tool. So the last thing I want to talk about today is an article that came out of the Frameworks Institute, and it was commissioned by a large number of organizations and grant-making institutions that have a vested interest in aging. And what it set out to do, this is the first of many to come, was to gauge, was there a difference between the expert view of aging and the public view of aging? So this may, if Greg's in the room, he might feel a little better about this definition of aging than the one that Dr. Newman gave us. And that is the expert view that came out of semi-structured interviews with chosen experts across agencies like the Aging Society of America, GSA, the Gerontological Society of America, and other leading institutions, is a normal and cumulative process that extends across the life course. It is a part of our biological design and is distinct from disease and decline. So it's separating out the disease and the decline that Dr. Newman was referring to. However, when they interviewed the public, and these were individuals ranging in age from 18 to 64, this was the view, the collective view that emerged from the public, and that is a process of deterioration, dependency, reduced potential, family dispersal, and digital incompetence. This does not bode well for us to get national initiatives off the ground. So what are the implications of this incongruent viewpoint? Well, there was an aspiring or an ideal model of aging, and then there was the real model of aging. So while those individuals interviewed aspired to leading a life like our gymnast at the top of the picture, being self-independent, self-regulated, healthy, active, their actual real view was of the bottom picture, of frailty, of an inability to manage oneself. It also was depicting a marginalization, an us versus them, categorizing older adults as a group that we're really not sure what we're going to do about. It was a very fatalistic view as well. Nothing can be done. So this is a public view, and these are individuals who are going to shape policy as it relates to aging initiatives. And it was a preoccupation that it was really up to the individual to be responsible for the aging process, that there was no shared responsibility. However, what's paradoxical about that is, in the early part of the century, it was the shared responsibility that we took for improving the health of the nation that really got us to the point that we currently find ourselves at. And I tell you about the bottom one, but I can't see it. So to close up, what are some conclusions? And again, this is a 10,000-foot view. I leave it to my esteemed colleagues in this room to really think about how this impacts your own research agendas. It certainly has impacted mine, just thinking, and has evolved as a function of really looking at some of the work that my colleagues are doing and also thinking about some of the issues that are emerging. But the first is that future research in aging related to improving health and well-being must really be considered as a dynamic interplay, that we can't work at one of those levels of the social ecological model in isolation, that we need to be thinking about how interpersonal factors, how the social, cultural environment in which we reside, and how society will actually shape the aging process that we experience. I really still do believe that we've got a lot of work to do with physical activity interventions, and that they really need to be continually tailored to individual preferences. We really need to address the shocking health disparities that exist in this country as it relates to access to physical activity. And we need to systematically include proven behavior change strategies in all of them. My own work has benefited from that, and I really do believe that those of us doing physical activity research will definitely benefit from integrating proven behavior change strategies. Effective PA interventions need to be scaled up, disseminated, and sustained. I was chatting with Sari yesterday after her presentation and asking about, well, where is active living every day now and where is active choices? Many years were spent demonstrating the effectiveness of those particular interventions. But where are they? We really need to be pushing forward and scaling up what we know to be effective PA interventions and getting them to national levels. We do a lot of research, we get a lot of grant money, we finish the research, and away goes a lot of the work that we've done, or it doesn't get shared at a national level. I really do believe that mobile technology, if it's designed well, and it actually includes the older adult voice in its design, can be very effective in delivering health-promoting interventions. And finally, I think there really is a need to reframe the cultural models that currently drive the public perception of aging. We are absolutely inundated by the social media with anti-aging conversations. I was passing a billboard the other day, and it was the most horrendous thing I'd seen about we need to put a stop to aging. I don't know how one does that, but and I don't think plastic surgery is going to do it. But you know, this is the perception that we're facing when we're trying to really work hard to improve the quality of lives of older adults, and in fact, everybody across the lifespan. Because if that's the message our young children are getting now, they're going to have absolutely no interest in aging, and it's just going to perpetuate the negative stereotypes that we currently have. So I really hope our sociologists and our historians and our philosophers will pick up on this, because there is a real ethical consideration that's emerging with how we treat the older adults in this country. So thanks for your attention this morning.